Next, a news conference on the Aldrich Ames CIA spy case held by members of the House Intelligence Committee. Earlier today, some panel members led by Chairman Dan Glickman of Kansas released its report reviewing the CIA's handling of the case. The briefing lasts about 40 minutes.
Okay, we do have Mr. Skaggs coming. I want to make sure that he will, when he comes there. Okay, why don't we go ahead and begin? And I've got a statement that Mr. Combest, the ranking member, and Mr. Lewis, another member, and there may be other members here, including Mr. Skaggs, and I'd like them to make statements as well. The committee yesterday approved by unanimous vote issuance of its report into the Aldrich Ames espionage case. The report is the culmination of a 9-month inquiry, the most exhaustive investigation the committee conducted during my tenure as chairman and as a member of the committee, befitting the most serious, most damaging espionage case in the Central Intelligence Agency's history. I might point out that, of course, the Senate committee did their own report. The difference, and we agree with most of their findings, but the difference is that we did an independent investigative analysis. We did our own independent interrogation of witnesses. We did not rely on the Inspector General's report as the prime base of information, original source information about this particular case. The committee made 8 principal findings, 2 of which make a unique contribution to understanding the case and the lessons to be learned from it. Neither of these findings were included in the report of the CIA Inspector General nor in the report of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. First, the committee found that the CIA failed to keep the oversight committees fully and currently informed of the 1985-86 losses and of important developments in the efforts to determine their causes, contrary to the clear requirements of the National Security Act. Members of the committee repeatedly asked the right questions, but the CIA officials over the years did not give them candid answers. Even those officials who knew the extent of losses and that an investigation was underway. The committee believes this is a most serious matter, and as a result, the report recommends strengthening the notification requirements already in the law to include possibly tougher statutory requirements, as well as a report from the Director of Central Intelligence by the end of December on what remedial steps will be taken. That will be, the committee agreed, one of its top priorities in the 104th Congress, and I believe, at least for sure, Mr. Skaggs and Mr. Lewis will be on that committee. We hope Mr. Combest is as well, perhaps as chairman. Second, the committee found that the FBI's role in the unraveling of the Ames espionage activities was inexplicably passive despite unprecedented openness and access to CIA files. Consequently, the committee recommends that the Department of Justice's Inspector General conduct an examination of the FBI's role in the Ames case, similar to that already conducted by the CIA's Inspector General. Our point is that while the focus to this date has been on the CIA and its inability to aggressively and timely get to the bottom of the Ames case, we believe that in the process, focus should also be on the FBI's failures, which occurred at the same time. I commend this report to 3 audiences: to the intelligence community, to the members of Congress, and the members of the committee in the new Congress, and the public. To the intelligence community, there are 2 messages. The obvious is that things need to be fixed. Many constructive steps are being implemented, which the committee supports. There are other recommendations that I am confident the committee will probe in the future, and therein lies the second message. The committee takes its oversight responsibilities very seriously. That is one of the reasons the committee decided to conduct its own independent investigation of this case. Congressional oversight need not be, nor should it be, antagonistic, but it must be challenging. When the committee poses the toughest challenges and the intelligence community meets them, then the interests of both are served. Our democracy rests on a system of checks and balances. With regard to intelligence, that is the oversight process. The failure of those checks and balances was not the sole failing in the Ames case, but it was a significant one, and one which may have exacerbated others. That is, had the community kept the oversight committees actively involved in connection with the losses that occurred, this thing may have been wrapped up much earlier. To the members of the committee in the future, the lesson of the inquiry is straightforward. It is a model of the seriousness of which you should approach your duties and the thoroughness with which you should accomplish them. And finally, to the public, I commend this report for two reasons. One, it disproves popular notions that Democrats and Republicans cannot cooperate and are occupied with little more than partisan bickering. Second, the public needs to understand the challenges before the intelligence community and the committee's recommendations in order to assess whether it's getting the value it deserves from the tax dollars which support intelligence. War is too important to be left to the generals, and intelligence is too important to be left to the spies. We all have a stake in it. Moreover, we all have a vested interest in ensuring the intelligence community recovers from this dark episode. And before I recognize Mr. Combest, let me just make a couple of final comments. The Ames case is perhaps the most graphic and vivid example of the need to make structural changes in the operation of our intelligence community. We have begun that process. Some of it is like pulling teeth, to be honest with you. Both inside the intelligence community and inside the government as a whole. Some of it is actually Mr. Woolsey and the CIA are doing a very good job of moving ahead in terms of management changes. But as a result of this Ames case, we have this Warner Commission, which is going to go into the entire functions of intelligence community and may recommend fundamental structural changes, may recommend radical downsizing. Who knows what they may recommend? My personal hope is that the sky's the limit in terms of the recommendation. As long as they keep in mind the need to have an effective intelligence community warning the U.S. of serious threats to its basic existence, I personally view current budgets, current operating procedures, the whole kit and caboodle as it relates to the management of the intelligence community on the table. And I hope that they take an open review of all these things. And now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the committee who has been an equal partner with me on this effort and everything else, Mr. Combest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. The publication of the House Intelligence Committee's report on Aldrich Ames espionage case marks the closing of one chapter of the committee's oversight, responsibilities, and the opening of another. Having reached some conclusions on how Ames became a spy, and how the counterintelligence and personnel systems were ill-equipped to unveil him sooner, we now begin our work with the DCI and with the appropriate elements of the intelligence community to remedy the problems that we've identified. I would refer you to the specific findings that we have concluded in this report, and I would further encourage you to read the report in full. At 77 pages, it represents a distillation of tens of thousands of pages of documents that we reviewed and the 100+ hours of interviews and briefings that we have concluded. I am proud of the report. It goes to the heart of the counterintelligence and accountability problems that we have identified. It makes clear the still unexplained failure of the CIA to keep the oversight committees fully and currently informed of the disastrous losses of Soviet assets and important developments in its efforts to determine their causes. This is central to the oversight process, and I expect that the committee will follow up on this issue in the next Congress. At the same time, it strikes a note of fairness which has sometimes been absent in the public discourse about the Ames case. The committee has been adamant in its condemnation of errors, personal and systematic. It is equally adamant in its findings that the CIA and the intelligence community continue to provide excellent intelligence of critical value in protecting American interests worldwide. It is lamentable but necessary that intelligence successes do not receive the publicity of its failures. So now we go from diagnosing problems to fixing them. That will be a major interest of this committee in the next Congress. In this regard, I'm certain that the committee will work closely with the DCI and with the intelligence community. Its approach will be constructive and responsible. The business of intelligence oversight, like the business of intelligence itself, is too important not to do it well. We on the committee are privileged to have had a view of our country's intelligence strengths as well as its weaknesses. Our goal is quite simply to increase the former and decrease the latter. This report gives us a blueprint to do just that on the issues of counterintelligence, personnel security, and management accountability in the intelligence community. I can assure you that we take these matters extremely seriously and will continue to work very hard at following them up, and would like to reiterate what the chairman said in regards to the concerns that every member of the committee had. Well, I can't speak for every member. It certainly heard nothing dissentive of the lack of keeping the committee informed in a timely fashion over a period of time in which very specific questions were asked of them. We may not have been able to prevent this, but we think we could have had some significant bearing in possibly causing it to come to head sooner. And I hope that that is one of the major areas the committee looks in very shortly in the 104th Congress.
Dave Skaggs.
David Skaggs from Colorado. There is one area in our proceeding to look at the Ames case that I particularly wanted to stress to you all this morning. As the committee reviewed the case, and in particular as we heard from Director Woolsey as he explained his approach in making his decisions about disciplinary action, it struck me that he was asking the wrong questions. He was, in essence, asking, quote, "For those in positions of responsibility, is there definitive evidence of culpability? And if so, how do I write or mete out a sanction that is both intrinsically fair and fair compared to what I have been able to do in other cases?" Unquote. That is ascribing a thought to Director Woolsey. That was not a direct quote. But the point I'm trying to make is that he was approaching all this as a civilian judge might, or perhaps even a civilian defense lawyer, fully attentive to the full range of civil due process requirements. He was judging the agency's most egregious failings by giving those in charge full benefit of the doubt. I believe, and I think most of the members of the committee believe, that this approach asks the wrong questions by applying the wrong standards of responsibility and accountability. It therefore risks producing the wrong answers, and it almost certainly sends the wrong message about the standards that ought to apply at the agency. It would be far better to see the agency, and especially the Directorate of Operations, as a quasi-military organization, having the vital national security mission that it does, and therefore to apply high standards of fairly strict responsibility and accountability to persons in command. That means if something goes wrong on your watch, on your command, when you're in charge, you are presumed responsible and accountable for it. That's the starting point. And only then do you proceed to weigh extenuating circumstances. I believe the career professionals at the CIA want and expect no less than to be held to such a high standard. To do so, I believe, will fulfill their aspirations to continue to be the very best intelligence service in the world. To expect less of them in the context of this investigation, I think, is to do the agency and the career people who serve this country so admirably a disservice.
Mr. Picas.
I thank the gentleman for allowing us the opportunity to speak at this press conference. The bipartisan approach to this is never better exemplified than in the preparation of this report, because both the chairman and the ranking member listened very carefully to the concerns of members of the committee from both sides of the aisle on the compilation of the final report. And that then did contain what I wanted to see it contain, an emphasis and a re-emphasis on the fact that the individual losses or compromises that were occasioned by the Ames treachery down the line were never promptly reported to the committee, so that the committee never had the opportunity to crack down, if it could at all, on the ongoing system that Ames had put into place. Who knows what would have happened if, upon learning upon the first loss or the first compromise or the first death or whatever could trigger a concern on the part of the intelligence community on our side of the ocean and within the Intelligence Committee, what we could have done to stop the process and perhaps caught Ames way before most of the damage was accomplished. So I endorse the report and re-emphasize in my own way, if I can, the importance that this places on the continuing role of the Intelligence Committee. That is, the oversight capacity and duty of the Intelligence Committee never has been shown more dramatically than through the events that led up to the report and by the report itself. Thank you.
Walter, there's no reason why you'd know this, but I'm the author of the Newsman Shield Law, which put it in the state constitution in California. So I certainly wouldn't question your sources, but I want you to know that it's not my intention to go to the CIA or the FBI to try to ferret out those sources myself. I'm here as a member who's been very strongly supportive of this agency. The strong feeling that in this changing world, which is much more complex in many ways than the past East-West confrontation, we do need intelligence sources that carry out the highest level of professional performance insofar as those national needs are concerned. I must say that the Ames case, while it is a tragedy, the report itself, with careful analysis, would tell anybody who would but look that there continue to be some serious questions to be raised about the way the agency has been operating over a period of time, not just during this director's service. The personnel issues that are obvious if one analyzes how Ames, a person of highly questionable skill himself, of highly questionable professional standard, ever got to such a very serious position of responsibility that allowed him access to the material he had access to, raises questions for those in oversight responsibilities that must be answered. The committee continues in a nonpartisan way to recognize the grave national issues that are involved in the work of the agency. In the future, we'll be carefully looking at questions like domestic terrorism. Clearly, the FBI has serious responsibilities in connection with those future analyses. As the world has changed and become much more complex, the work of the agency is all the more critical to the President and the appropriate committees of the House. I continue as a member on this committee to intend to ask questions about how we got here in the first place, how Ames ever got to where he was, what steps need to be taken to make certain this agency is operating at the highest professional standard, and to make sure that the people's body, that is the Senate and the House, are carefully and timely, in a timely fashion informed regarding problems that arise within the agencies that are involved here.
Questions?
Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this, what you've said about the intelligence community not promptly informing the committee about these losses? What did they not explain that they were hunting for a mole, or did they not explain the losses? Could you?
Perhaps Mr. Combest may want to comment more specifically on some of this, and I don't want to go into great detail, but I think he was one of the members that did make inquiry in years past, and was answered in a way to indicate that there was no clear and pressing problem occurring, that any losses might be as a result of an anomaly or a statistical imperfection rather than anything clearly indicating that there was a spy involved or there was a penetration, human or perhaps mechanical, in the agency. And I think that the record indicates that questions were specifically and unequivocally made to the agency over a period of years about rumors, about discussions, about thoughts of penetrations, and there was no evidence, to the best of my knowledge, and Mr. Combest had a comment on this, that anything specifically was ever given to us at all. Now, the question is that had we been informed of losses or penetrations, what would we have done? My betting is that the committee would have called the agency up and asked them to outline what they were doing to deal with these losses. And would that have resulted in an expedited or an improved investigative process? I can't tell you for sure. My betting is that it would have caused them to at least focus to a greater degree on that. Perhaps you might want to comment more.
It would only add this, and in the report, and I presume most of you haven't seen it yet, but will very soon. We specifically mentioned that there were members who had asked pointed questions. I was one of those. I would not care to identify who the others were, and would not have identified myself, but I was one. They were very pointed about potential problems that had been uncovered. I would not go beyond that. But to make a comment on what the chairman said, one of the problems that this report focuses was that there were those in senior positions that did not seemed to know. They at least had indicated that there had not been reported to them the problems at lower levels. I assure you, had the committee known, I mean, look around you today. This has been one of the spy stories of the century. This is something we take very seriously. Had we known about a problem, we would have been relentless in the agency and the FBI and others who might be involved in this to make for sure they gave us some answers. They would have been aware at the highest levels within the agencies of our concern had we known about it.
Were you lied to, sir?
I would not go as far as to say that, because I do not have the I do not know for certain that the questions that I specifically asked were known by the individual to whom those questions were asked.
Saying it could have been ignorance and not...
It could have been ignorance, but if that was even the case, again, I'm not accusing anyone of, well, I'm not going to say that I was lied to, but let me say that if it were ignorance, then that again focuses why that this report talks about the fact that this has got to be heard all the way up the chain, everyone involved in this. A spy case, by myself, as being a member of this committee for 6 years, there is very little that I could put above my interest in ferreting out a spy case.
I just want to add one thing, that this very same problem is the main focus, as far as I'm concerned, of the Intelligence Committee report and its recommendations. That is, if we would have our way, those of us who will be remaining on the Intelligence Committee, there will be a mechanism put in place where in future situations, as soon as a loss occurs, the Intelligence Committee must learn about it so that it can take its collective action at that point.
Can I follow on that
Yes.
with you and Mr. Combes, please? Most of your remarks today are geared to things that happened sometime before, why they didn't answer candidly, why information wasn't made available on the Hill. But what about, as the loss was occurring, was that CIA laziness, or was it blasé, was it peacetime? What?
We've not
would you characterize their attitude?
uncovered exactly the rationale that existed at that time for the lack of knowledge on the part of the committee members as to the losses.
I'm talking about CIA itself. Why was it? Why did this low-level guy get to where he got?
Well, that's been covered in basically all the reports. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the due diligence in the intelligence community, particularly in the CIA, as it related to vetting employees and enhancing and promoting employees and monitoring their behavior, was, in many cases, primitive. And we've suffered because of that.
I would just certainly agree with what the chairman said. This is one of the areas in which this report focuses, and that is to look at why, within the community, something of what seemingly in hindsight was of some substantial significance. Now, let me just mention here that initially when the problems began, there was a feeling that this related back to the Howard case. It became obvious that in some of the instances of the problems that had been detected within the Soviet Union would not have been possibly known to Howard. That should have, in my opinion, sent up a tremendously strong red flag that, quite honestly, was not followed up.
Tim?
One of the enduring mysteries of this case is why the mole hunt essentially faded into obscurity during the period when Judge Webster was running CIA. You would think that you could have no better person to focus a joint FBI-CIA investigation than the judge, who had a decade of experience with the Bureau and several years at the agency. His position is now essentially mole hunt. What mole hunt? They never told us about any mole hunt. We knew that there were a couple of cases that had gone bad, but no one told us that a couple dozen operations had gone sour and that 8, 9, 10 people had gotten a bullet in the brain. What's your assessment? I mean, did Judge Webster, was he fully informed of the losses? Do you know that he was? Do you identify some leadership problems here? What's your assessment of why the mole hunt essentially faded into nothingness during that period?
It's uncertain. There are mixed stories on this. Some who would have been aware and felt that he had been briefed, and yet I understand that in his interviews, which did take place by staff, that he does not recollect that. It is not possible for me to say which one of those is erroneous. So therefore, it would not be. I think there's a strong area there that is unclear. It is, however, something that any CIA director should be the most concerned about if, in fact, they knew about it. This is something I would think that basically should be done on a continual basis. It's trying to find where your potential spies are, because we have looked at what this has cost us. I cannot answer the question if he knew. In the interviews with him, he said he did not.
Well, you know, I personally believe that whether you call it institutional or individual negligence, my own personal belief is that a negligent attitude prevailed at the agency with respect to the identification of the penetration. Whether it was lack of attention, lack of systems, lack of standards, lack of reporting, bad management, bad followership. In my judgment, it was all of the above. It was the classic case of when something goes wrong, everything goes wrong. The focus and the attention wasn't there. And as Mr. Combest said in a different way, I'll say it, it is unbelievable to think that at an agency whose sole purpose in life was to find out what was happening in Moscow and to focus on their spies and knowing that they were focusing on our spies, not to have highlighted this problem to the highest levels possible is unbelievable, and that it happened for so long. But it did. And I happen not to think there was any nefarious reason why it happened. I don't think there was any conspiracy of silence there. I just think it was a case of sloppiness in big capital letters.
It again further emphasizes, though, what has been said is had the committee known, Mr. Webster would have come before the committee to answer the question.
Mr. Skaggs was critical of Director Woolsey. Are all of you satisfied that the director is up to the job, or should he be replaced?
Let me make a comment. The committee was not totally unified on portions, several portions of the report. We all did certainly vote unanimously to report it out, those in attendance. Different members are going to have different focuses. I have not tried to focus as much on trying to micromanage the director's decisions about problems within the agency or how he may have dealt with them. I think that we have to recognize that the agency is unique and that you've got people out there whose lives are on the line on a daily basis. And to make them more concerned about the fact that every movement is going to have to be accounted for may cause them not to be concerned about being able to do their duty. Let me, just a perfect example. You've got a U.S. spy who's working a Soviet agent, a Russian agent, whoever the agent may be. The agent offers him papers in public. Does he take them for fear that there's going to be someone there photographing that and that he's going to have to worry about that the rest of his life, or does he not take them for fear that, well, this could be a setup? And so beginning to be, because of the hierarchy that is looking down upon this person, his judgment may become very questionable. Consequently, it may affect his duties. What I think that I want to emphasize is how do we correct this and keep it from happening in the future? This did not happen on Jim Woolsey's watch. I am a strong believer that the director looked at this very seriously. I think he did exactly correct in his initial concerns about not pointing fingers at people who were not in fact guilty. There was, if you will recall, right after the Ames case was brought to the public, a crying of, well, we got to have some heads roll. Well, the heads may not have still been around to roll. We don't roll heads just simply in order to send a message. There are people whose careers are at stake here. In the IG's report, they did not have indications in that of the thorough investigation that, in my opinion, would have required anything more severe than in reprimands than the director imposed.
If I just may, as Larry said, there's some differences of opinion on this. I do think it's unfortunate that Jim Woolsey personally has become the focus of the Ames spy case. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Jim Woolsey had nothing to do with shipping secrets all over the world and causing Americans to be jeopardized. And I do think there's been a little too much personal focus there. This happened during the administrations of Bill Casey, Judge Webster, and Bob Gates, to be honest with you. Jim Woolsey had nothing to do with the operation of the agency when this was going on. Saying that, however, I do have some sensitivity to Mr. Skaggs' position. You may recall when the Iraqi aircraft, when we shot down one of our own helicopters, or one of the Iraqi helicopters, one of the Kurdish helicopters, and how the in the military disciplines people within the line of authority, and those in command positions were on the line, notwithstanding that they did not pull the trigger. And I do think that to some extent Mr. Woolsey viewed this issue in a more mechanistic way, that we're going to look for the people who actually pulled the trigger and not for the people who set the policies. Now, saying that, I'm not going to second guess exactly what he did and who he disciplined. I don't think that would serve anybody any good anymore. We're doing this for future purposes, but I do think there is something to be said to what Mr. Skaggs had indicated, that managers at the CIA need to know that they are responsible for the acts of the people who work for them.
What about the case of Ted Price, who was in charge of counterintelligence, and as a result of this was promoted to director of operations? Do you think that a person in that position who is directly responsible for counterintelligence should be allowed to continue in that position?
All I can tell you is that I've talked to Mr. Woolsey about this. I happen to think that Ted Price is a decent man and you know, a good person. Woolsey indicates that Price's role at the time in terms of his management responsibilities was so attenuated time-wise and so limited from a management cycle that you would be punishing him just because he was in the position of manager and not that he had any line item responsibility for the act that was being involved. So I'm not going to second guess that. But it may have been that if the principles had been laid out years ago, that managers were responsible for the acts of their subordinates, that people like him or others who were immediately put in those responsibilities would have been a lot more diligent early on.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, sure. In connection with that, there's no question that the committee has come to the conclusion that for future handling of our relationships of oversight responsibility with the agency, that there should be established a different standard than apparently has been in the past. There's little question that the crises that is a result of the Ames case, the critical circumstance, is considerably less than it might have been. There's a confluence of time here that happened to benefit the United States a lot, for we were coming close to the end of the Cold War. If this kind of information had been available to the Soviet Union just a few years earlier, I refer you to a book that's current that relates to the skunk works of the Lockheed Corporation that involved work between the agency and some of our highest level private contractors in developing technology that was very important to our success in the East-West confrontation. If this kind of information had flowed to the Soviet Union, the result of the Cold War indeed might have been different. So it's very important that for futures we make certain there's a different standard, and I think that's the point the committee's making.
Yeah, I wanted to try to get back to your original question for just a moment as well. Please do not interpret my comments as suggesting that Director Woolsey is not up to the job. I've strongly supported him in most of what he's tried to get accomplished at the agency, and I hope that perhaps lends some credibility to this criticism of the way he approached this particular aspect of his job. And as Jerry suggests, I think we are much more concerned with the signal that the standards applied by Woolsey in this case send prospectively than anything else. And my feeling, I think the feeling of many of my colleagues on the committee, is that that the standard of responsibility and accountability for individuals in command positions at the agency needs to be a very strict one. Again, if things go sour on your watch, not, if I may go back to Larry's example, not if there's some appearance of a transaction problem, but if things go really bad on your watch, you're going to be held accountable for that unless there are clear explanations to the contrary. It was the reverse of that standard that tended to be applied in these circumstances, where, you know, we sifted through all the evidence in a kind of civil fact-finding way, and, well, you know, if it added up to clear and convincing, then we'll look at disciplinary action. I think, you know, a reverse approach to this is what is necessary if you're going to have people in an agency with the kind of responsibilities that the CIA has worthy of the implicit trust from their co-workers and from the Congress and from the President and from the country that we have every right to expect. They have to know that it's a very different kind of enterprise and that the standards that are applied are consistent with that very different kind of enterprise.
Morale's not great out there, and it hasn't been helped by this case and by the public whipping the agency's taken as a consequence of it. Are you concerned that there's been a brain drain out there, that talented people are leaving, that the combination of bad morale and the kind of drift of mission since the end of the Cold War is hurting the agency and thus the United States?
I personally think mission drift is a more serious problem than this case. I think the post-Cold War era, not a non-definable, clear-cut focus or reason for the existence of the agency. I mean, we know that they are doing very important things, and as Larry said, they're doing things that involve a lot of successes that would help us. But there's no question that the lack of clarity in mission is hurting the agency, and it is something that maybe the next committees, oversight committees, can address further. The Warner Commission is going to address further, although in its zeal, the Warner Commission could actually continue to contribute to some of this until such time as it completes its report. One of the things that I do suggest is the White House become, the National Security Council, the White House become more personally involved with the CIA, not like in the Casey days where they're ordering covert actions here and there and yonder, but I think they've got a stake, a personal stake in making sure that you've got an intelligence community that feels they're part of the overall national security mission of the United States and aren't just some separate group of boxes out there that are looking for problems wherever they occur and then reporting back to somebody else. I really think that would be helpful, particularly at a time period where the missions aren't quite as clear as they used to be.
How much is the FBI to blame?
Well, I don't think that the purpose is not to blame the FBI or the CIA. The report indicates that the FBI, there were some problems in the organization and conduct of investigation by the FBI. At the same time, there were some problems at the CIA itself. We only put that in there because the FBI was primarily responsible for domestic law enforcement functions, and we thought it was fair to point out that both the CIA and the FBI did not take the case perhaps as seriously as it should have early on. That's all. But we're not saying the FBI was responsible for anything. You know, we're just saying that they need to look inside their own house as well.
And once a year.
Yeah. And the report says that once they got focused, they were great, but it took them a while to get focused.
Well, you said at the start that Congress should now focus on the FBI failures.
Well, I'm not saying focus on the FBI failures. We're saying that the FBI had some problems, and that it's time for them to focus on themselves, the same way the CIA has focused on itself. And I think the FBI, and this is not to play one agency off against the other. The FBI does a tremendous job, and once they got actively engaged, they did an superb job of law enforcement. But I think they need to take a look at themselves and figure out why it took so long. And I think even their director indicates that that's an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds as though when you spoke about institutional negligence, and not having read the report, I can't say, but did the report come to a very clear picture of who or what is to blame for the failure of this?
No one thing. We in that sense, we parallel a lot of what the IG said and the Senate committee said. You know, we list a variety of institutional problems there that contributed to this. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
No, I don't. Yeah, right there. Yes.